Hi, guys. Today we will start with the story Stone Age Cooking Fire and the Birth of Taste. The world of the Stone Age smells of smoke, blood, and the freshness of dawn. Beneath the looming sky, the tribe gathers around the fire. This fire is not just warmth, it is the center of life the hearth, the altar, and the oven. Here, Neanderthals transform what is found, hunted, and dug from the earth into food. For hundreds of generations before them, food was eaten raw. But now, everything is different. Fire has become an ally, changing the taste of the world. It softens tough meat, makes poisonous tubers edible, and turns rotting flesh into something safe. The men return from the hunt. The carcass of a young bison is dragged across the grass. It's a celebration. Such a thing is rare. First, the meat is torn apart with stone knives. The best parts are chosen: the heart, the liver, the kidneys. These are cooked immediately on hot stones. There are no spices. The taste is pure, primal, a bit of ash, drops of fat, a trace of salt from the animal's skin. People don't chew so much as gulp. Taste is not pleasure, it's energy, a gift, power. But food is not just meat. Women and children bring roots, berries, nuts. They know which tubers to boil, which to eat raw, and which to soak in water for a full day to avoid death. Cooking here is instinct, knowledge, and memory. Everything has been tested over thousands of years. If a plant didn't kill you, it might feed you. The root of hemlock killed 3 people. It is no longer touched. But earth apple, now a treasure. It is baked in ashes, wrapped in leaves. After several hours, tastes sweet like honey. Honey, by the way, doesn't exist here. But one spring, someone found a wild beehive, one of the rare flavors that makes eyes close in bliss. Fish, food by the river. It's not fried, but baked whole, uncleaned. Scales and innards burn away. What remains is tender, soft flesh. Sometimes fish is dried in the sun, food for later. Birds are rare. But if lucky, they catch a duck, a goose, or even an eagle. The bird is cooked in a pit, covered with hot stones. It's a complex process, but gives an incredible flavor. Smoke, meat, and the aroma of herbs placed nearby. Among stones and bones, sometimes grows wild greens. Bitter, sharp, but needed. They're chewed with fatty meat. The taste is balanced. Bitterness eases digestion. This knowledge comes without books, only in bodies. Their flavors are not about pleasure. They are the language of survival. If food gives strength, nourishes, and does not kill, it is tasty. But it's not that simple. Taste becomes important when there is choice. When there is none, the only goal is to not be hungry. Gifts of the earth: roots, nuts, berries, and poisons. The earth nourishes no worse than meat, but it demands more patience, observation, and memory. For Neanderthals, food doesn't just grow. It must be found, recognized, and never mistaken. Because a mistake here means death. Everything that doesn't move might be food. But what exactly, not everyone knows. The wisest women are not priestesses or leaders. They are the bearers of edible knowledge. They remember what can be dug up, what can be gathered, and what must be feared. Roots are the foundation of plant-based food. They're gathered after rain, when the soil is soft and the plants full of moisture. Large tubers are baked in ash. Small ones are dried in the sun. Bitter ones are soaked in rivers. Some kinds require 3 days of rinsing to remove the bitterness. This is chemistry without formulas, only experience. Nuts are especially prized. They provide fat and calories. Wild hazelnuts, bitter almonds, even chestnuts. They're cracked open with stones, and the edible cores are ground into paste. This paste is mixed with water, sometimes with animal fat. resulting in a nourishing mass, almost like soup. Berries are the color of summer. They store sunlight. Sour, sweet, astringent. Each taste carries meaning. Sourness invigorates, sweetness feeds, bitterness cools. They are collected in leather pouches and dried under the sun. Some berries are a rare dessert, but berries are dangerous too. Red and shiny can mean poison. There's a rule. If birds don't eat it, neither should humans. That's how children are taught. Poisons are part of cuisine as well. Not for eating, but for knowledge. The tribe knows that the root of aconite can kill a mammoth. It's used in hunting. And the sap of certain plants causes hallucinations. That's food for spirits. The ancient scientists were those who ate and survived. Every taste, every herb, every mistake entered collective memory. Someone died so others would know what not to touch. Many of these herbs and roots are medicine. For stomach pain, for fever, for wounds. There is no division between food and cure. Whatever gives life, both heals and feeds. Mushrooms are a mystery. Some are delicious, others deadly. They're gathered rarely and carefully. Wise women break them apart, sniff them, observe the color of their spores. Sometimes they're given first to the elders. If they survive, the mushroom is safe. Flavor here doesn't come from spices. It is the smell of soil, the texture of bark, the juice of leaves, the sharpness of berries. It is food born in forest, mud, and stone. Neanderthals had no word for vitamins or carbohydrates, but they knew the body. It told them. If it craved sour things, they sought berries. If it longed for fat, they hunted nuts. That's how taste evolved. Not for pleasure, but as a signal, a call of nature. And they followed that call every day for life. Meat, hunting, and the ritual of eating. Meat is a celebration, not because it tastes good, but because it's rare. True hunting is always a risk. Broken bones, death, failure. But when luck arrives and the animal lies on the ground, a different ritual begins. First, silence. Everyone looks at the fallen creature. Mammoth, aurochs, deer. It doesn't matter. It was alive. Now it's food. Gratitude isn't spoken aloud. It's in the gaze, in the quiet, in the respect shown to the body. Butchering is a serious task. Stone knives are crude, yet precise. The hide is removed quickly, while the body is still warm. Meat is cut into large chunks, tendons are separated, fat is collected into special containers, often made from the dried stomachs of other animals. The best parts are the organs. Liver, heart, kidneys, they go first. They are roasted on hot stones or directly over coals. Raw organs are eaten only in extreme need. Hunting isn't just about meat. It's a moment of unity. Each tribe member receives a portion. Men, women, children, everyone gets a piece. Hunger matters, but fairness matters more. Without it, arguments, division, collapse. Meat isn't just food, it's preserved. Some is smoked over fire, some is air-dried. In the winter months, it's the foundation of survival. Without stores, death. Sometimes an animal's cooked whole. That's rare but significant. In a pit lined with hot stones, the carcass is laid with herbs, roots, and leaves. It's buried under earth. After half a day, the meat becomes soft, fragrant like nothing else. It's more than food, it's a ritual. Before eating, there is always waiting. Elders taste first. It ensures the meat hasn't spoiled, that no poisonous root was used. This is ancient hygiene. To eat is to live, but also to remember where food came from, who risked their life, how the animal ran, how its blood soaked the ground. All of that is part of the flavor. Children learn from the earliest age, not just to eat, but to understand. Meat with tendon, for chewing, to strengthen the jaw. Bone broth, for growth. fat for strength. Food is a lesson. The smell of roasting meat gathers the tribe. Even those in conflict draw closer. Fire, meat, smoke, symbols of peace. While the food cooks, words aren't needed. Only fire, the whisper of melting fat, and the crackle of coals. A dog waits by the fire for bones. An old man retells a hunt from 20 years ago. A boy tastes mammoth tongue for the first time. All of this, life, bound by threads of flavor, warmth, and gratitude. And it is in such evenings that something like happiness appears. Simple, wild, ancient. A taste remembered by the body, not the mind. The taste of water, fish, shellfish, seaweed. Where the forest ends, water begins. And it, too, feeds. Rivers, lakes, coastal zones, pantries of life. One just needs to know how to unlock their doors. Fish, the first gift of water. Catching them isn't just tossing a net. Neanderthals had spears tipped with sharpened stone points. They would wait, knee-deep in the water, motionless, until a silver body flickered. The strike had to be precise. No second chance. Sometimes they didn't catch fish, but trapped them. They built barriers from stones and shallow streams. Water passed through, fish did not. Then they simply collected the catch by hand. Fish were roasted on flat stones or skewered over fire. Larger ones were slit open and stuffed with herbs for flavor. Bones mattered. They were ground into powder and added to food. Calcium for bones and teeth. Some fish were eaten raw, especially far from fire during long migrations. But it was risky. Only an experienced hunter knew which ones were safe to eat uncooked. Near water, shellfish. River crayfish, mollusks, sea snails. These were gathered in shallows, dug from silt, or pulled from rocks by the sea. They were boiled in skin pots stretched over fire, or simply thrown into hot ash. Crayfish were eaten cautiously. If the shell was soft, better to leave it. That meant disease, and illness meant death. In coastal areas, seaweed was gathered. Not all, only those that didn't cause nausea. Seagrass was dried, then crumbled into meat, roots, soups. Iodine, minerals. They didn't know these words, but the body felt the need. Sometimes seaweed was used for healing, applied to wounds, chewed for sore throats. The taste was salty, sharp, but necessary. Shores were not only food sources, but places of exchange. Water connected tribes. Those who lived by the sea brought dried fish, salt. Forest dwellers brought nuts, meat, hides, and all shared meals together. Children learned to swim to gather shellfish. Women knew tides like moon cycles. Men built rafts to venture beyond the shore. Sometimes they harvested sea salt. They boiled water away, leaving white powder. It wasn't eaten raw, but added to broths, to fat. The flavor became brighter. Water gave not just food, but cleansing. After meals, hands were rinsed in rivers. Sometimes food was even cooled in water, so it wouldn't spoil by night. The silence by water was special. No shouting there. Fish sensed sound. Crabs hid from footsteps. A hunter by the water was a shadow, still, breathless. And when the meal was ready, everything carried the taste of water. Freshness, salt, depth. It was a different taste. Not of earth, not of fire. It was the taste of the current. Roots, tubers, and earth. The earth feeds, but not immediately. One must know where to dig. Neanderthals searched for food beneath their feet, among grasses and at the base of trees. Roots, tubers, bulbs. Invisible but valuable sources of calories. They dug with sharp sticks or even bare hands. The soil was softer in spring and after rain. An experienced person recognized edible plants by their leaves, stem shape, scent. A mistake meant poisoning, sometimes even death. Tubers were rarely eaten raw. They were tough, bitter, caused bloating. Almost everything went through fire. Some were simply baked in ashes, like modern potatoes. Others were placed in pits with hot stones, covered with leaves, then buried, slowly cooked. But the result? Tenderness, aroma, sweetness. Some roots tasted like nuts or even meat, especially after long preparation. Others required special treatment, soaking, drying, mixing with fat. It wasn't about taste. It was about strength. Sometimes roots were medicine. They were chewed for pain, applied to bites, bitter, burning, but helpful. People knew which ones not only fed but healed. The earth also gave spice. Certain clay-scented soils were added to stews. It was the taste of childhood, of primal cooking. Fire transformed root flavors. Bitterness faded. Soft sweetness appeared. What once had no scent began to smell, like the forest after rain. Women knew the seasons. In spring, one kind of root. In autumn, another. Children learned to identify plants by early leaves, by traces of animals digging the same ground. Roots were stored in dry pits lined with grass, sometimes wrapped in leaves and hidden beneath stones. Stores meant survival. There were rituals too. Some roots were eaten only on special occasions, after a hunt, at the turn of seasons, during illness. They were seen as gifts from the underworld, eaten in silence. The taste of earth is richness, density, gravity. It's food that brings strength slowly. Without it, the body couldn't endure long journeys, cold, or blood loss. Neanderthals could feel the earth as well as the sky. They knew where life hid beneath leaves, where food lay, silent, unmoving, defenseless. Food that waited to be found. On the season of hunger and hidden stores. There were days when the earth fell silent. Animals vanished, birds flew away, rivers froze. There was no scent of food in the air. This was the season of hunger. It didn't arrive suddenly, but inevitably. First, the berries disappeared. Then, the greens. Roots lasted the longest, but even they tired. Everything that grew slowed, stilled, hid. During this time, the tribe survived on what had been hidden beforehand. Stores, the essential knowledge of survival. Dried meat, smoked fish, nuts, fat. All were hidden in pits, behind rocks, inside hollow trees, sometimes hung from branches out of reach of animals. Fat was gold, rendered from bones, stored in skins or hollow horns. It protected from cold, gave energy. Eaten by the spoonful, added to roots, spread on dry meat. Some tribes made stone porridge, a mix of crushed nuts, dried berries, roots, and fat. It wasn't a meal. It was strength compressed into a handful. Salt was especially valued, collected in autumn by the water, stored in pouches. In winter, it was used grain by grain, so food didn't lose its taste. Even if food was scarce, it had to be edible. Sometimes they ate bark, the inner layers of young birch or willow, soft, slightly sweet, dried, ground, mixed into meals. Not tasty, but life-saving. Hunting during this time was luck. A single hare could feed all. A bird caught among the snow became a celebration. The tribe shared, even if only bones remained. Cold didn't just hinder, it helped preserve. Fish could be stored under snow, meat buried in frozen ground. Sometimes even bones were chewed, for the last traces of fat. Fire became a god. Without it, death. But firewood was scarce, so meals were often cold, barely warm, or eaten in turns to conserve heat. The hunger season taught. Children were quiet, listening to elders. Every bite counted. You couldn't be weak, couldn't be forgotten. Sometimes at night, in hunger, they recalled the smell of roasted meat, the taste of berries. And that too was food, for the mind, for endurance. Neanderthals survived winter not by strength, but by storage, by memory, by patience, and by sharing. even when almost nothing remained. Feast of food, the celebration by the fire. Sometimes a miracle happened. A successful hunt, a discovery of honey, the return of gatherers with full hands. On such days, food became not just sustenance, it turned into an event, a celebration. The tribe gathered around the great fire. The fire was the heart of this celebration. It provided light, warmth, and turned raw flesh into an aroma that could make heads spin. Meat was skewered on sticks, laid on stones, placed in the ash. Skin sizzled, fat dripped into the flames. Smoke became part of the flavor. It clung to bodies, to hair, to memory. Children laughed, breathing in the scent of food. Elders told stories. Women spread out the gathered roots, berries, herbs. Everything was put to use. Everything mixed. Bitter with sour, sweet with meat. It was a chaos of flavors, but it was alive. Sometimes they baked bread, flatbreads made from ground seeds and water. They were shaped directly on the stones by the fire. They were rough, hard, but filling. Occasionally, berries or fat were added. And then, it was a treat. At the feast, they brought their best. What they had stored, what they had preserved. Nuts, fat, even salt. All to make the evening unforgettable. Songs grew louder. Voices became freer. Food brought people closer. It wasn't just the food that was shared. It was joy. These were the moments when the tribe felt united. When no one was hungry. When even an enemy, if they came empty-handed, could receive a piece of meat as a sign of peace. On such nights, the fire blazed until dawn. Some fell asleep by the fire. Some gazed at the sky. Some were silent, simply feeling that life wasn't only about survival, but also about taste. Neanderthals knew how to celebrate food. They understood. A celebration isn't about excess. It's about a moment when you share, even though you could keep it to yourself. It's the choice to be together. Life after food, rest and dreams. When the fire began to fade and the meat disappeared from the bones, silence fell. The evening chill started to creep into their bodies, but not immediately. After food came rest, and this rest wasn't just physical, it was mental, deep. Neanderthals knew how to relax. They sat in a circle, stretched out their legs, and closed their eyes. Even if the night was long and frightening, they knew. After food came peace. It was a time for restoration. Women wove baskets, men sharpened tools, but more than anything, they simply sat in the glow of the fire, feeling each breath bring new warmth. The body thanked them for the food, and the mind for the calm. After food came dreams. Not everyone's dreams were sweet, but all of them were important. Some saw images they later spoke of. These were dreams of distant places, animals they had never seen. Dreams of the past and the future. Sleep was another part of food. It restored strength and balanced emotions. When people slept, their bodies processed not only the food, but also the experiences of the day. Each dream was like a piece of the great cycle of birth, life, and death. In this cycle, there was no place for chaos. Everything followed its laws. At night, the sounds of the forest were often heard, the gentle rustling of leaves, the night songs of animals. But among these sounds was another, the breathing of the tribe. It was steady, calm, synchronized. It was the sound of peace. Dreams enriched not only the body, but also the spirit. In them hid the wisdom of ancestors, the knowledge of how to survive, how to stay together. Even in dreams, lessons were passed down about how to use what the earth had left behind. On those nights when rest was at its peak and the stars were closer, the tribe did not feel alone. Here by the fire, there was not only warmth, there was life in its deepest manifestations. Neanderthals knew that food wasn't the only way to be nourished. Sometimes it was enough to simply calm down, relax, and let dreams fill the heart. Tracks on the earth, a journey by footprints. Every morning began with observation. The earth spoke, if one listened. Tracks in the sand, in clay, on grass were like words, written without letters. Neanderthals could read them. They knew what a hare's print looked like, how a boar stepped, how a bear scratched the bark. Even a slightly bent branch could tell of an animal that had passed before dawn. Following tracks was an art. It wasn't just moving forward, it was a journey through time. You could see where it walked, where it paused, where it got scared. You almost became the animal, stepped into its skin. Tracks told not only of animals, sometimes footprints of another tribe remained on the ground. They were hard to miss, big feet, a different gait. Sometimes a threat. Sometimes just strangers looking for food. Neanderthals learned from tracks. Children were taught to notice even the shadow of a print. It was the language of survival. Those who knew it ate. Those who didn't went hungry. Hunters moved silently, scanning the ground. Every step, a decision. Every stone, a sign. Sometimes the trail led far from the camp, but if the track was fresh, the hunter followed it to the end. Sometimes the tracks vanished. Then one had to think, where could it have gone? Where would it hide? This wasn't just hunting, it was reasoning. The animal did not surrender easily, and to catch it, you had to be smarter. Tracks were like a map that no one drew, but everyone knew how to read. They led to life, to food, to the future. Sometimes, returning from a hunt with meat or simply with knowledge, a hunter brought back more than food. He brought back the confidence that the world was not chaos, but meaning, that it could be understood if one watched their step closely. Roots and stones, foraging, and ancient botany. Before traps were invented, before the first spears, there was the hand reaching toward the earth. Foraging, the oldest of arts. Neanderthals knew how to find food where others saw only grass and rocks. Every morning, women, elders, and children went into the forest, onto the plains, toward rivers. They didn't walk aimlessly. They knew where to look. One glance at the leaves, one breath, and they already understood. Here lies a root. There hides a bulb. Over there, berries. Roots were the foundation. They dug them out with sticks, hands, stones. Some were sharp like knives, others soft and sweet. Some had to be boiled for a long time to remove bitterness. Some couldn't be eaten raw. The tribe had already learned the price of mistakes. Stones weren't just obstacles. They were clues. Where there were many stones, edible moss, mushrooms, or snails might be hiding. Neanderthals read the land like a book. Gathering was labor, but also discovery. Each day, nature changed. Berries appeared and disappeared. Flowers turned into fruits, and fruits into nourishment. Everyone knew. What you didn't take today might be taken tomorrow by a beast or the rain. Some women knew plants like modern doctors know medicine. They found leaves that healed, bark that eased pain, flowers that broke a fever. This was knowledge passed through whispers, gestures, glances. Foraging taught patience. You might walk for half a day and find nothing, and still go on. Because you knew, the earth held more generosity than the sky. You only had to know how to look. And every root found, every berry gathered, was a triumph. It was life pulled from cold, from hunger, from chance. And when they returned in the evening, their hands smelled of soil, grass, and life. Fire and flavor, the first culinary revolution. When fire became a friend, the world became tastier. Before it, food was raw, tough, cold. It had to be chewed for a long time with effort, and often not completely. But one day, a piece of meat fell into the fire, and everything changed. First, smoke, fear, loss, but then aroma, a smell that couldn't be ignored. The flame revealed not just warmth to Neanderthals, but flavor. They began to experiment, at first by accident, roasted berries, slightly charred roots, then deliberately. Meat was placed on hot stones and embers, speared on sticks and held over flames. This was the birth of cooking. Taste became a discovery. The softness of cooked food, the sweetness of a root after fire, the bitterness disappearing after heat, fat dripping into the ashes and sizzling. It awakened the senses. It was no longer just food. It was pleasure. Fire made food more accessible. Elders with aching teeth could now eat. Children chew without tears. Most importantly, cooked food lasted longer. That gave time. And time gave thought. Preferences emerged. Some liked meat with a crust. Some nearly raw. Some roots baked in ashes. Thus, taste was born. Individual, personal. And with it, talk about food. They shared, compared. Fire made food a topic. Sometimes they brought new things to the cave, mushrooms, unknown leaves. Placed them near the fire, smelled them, tasted with caution. This was the scientific method in a pre-verbal form. Testing, observing, concluding. Food became a reason to gather. Sitting by the fire, they ate together, slowly, shared. Not just meat, but words, glances. Fire didn't just cook the meat, it ignited culture. Fats and bones, winter's food, strategies. Winter did not forgive mistakes. The cold reached to the bones, snow-covered tracks, and animals disappeared. Those who weren't prepared died silently. Food became a matter of survival. Neanderthals knew. In winter, it wasn't those with the most meat who survived, but those with fat. Fat was warmth. It was energy. It was the long-burning fire inside the body. They hunted those who fattened up, wild boars, seals, reindeer. In a carcass, the most important part wasn't the meat, but the fat around the kidneys, under the skin, within the bones. Bones were treasure. They cracked them with stones, shattered them to get to the marrow. Soft, nutritious, fatty. Bone marrow was the food of the gods. It lasted longer, didn't freeze as quickly, and gave strength when other foods spoiled. They rendered fat, made warm pastes from it, spread it on roots, stored it in hollow bones, sometimes smeared it on skin, protecting it from the wind. This was winter in flavor. Thick, warm, surviving. Even bones left from autumn hunts were kept. They buried them in the snow, in a pit, in a corner of the cave. In winter, they dug them out and broke them open, like a find, like a treasure. Time became a job. You had to anticipate what you'd eat in 2 months. They ate everything, skins, tendons, even hooves when needed. They boiled, roasted, smoked. The less you wasted, the longer the tribe lived. Food was sacred. A bone could feed for days if you knew what to do with it. Sitting by the fire, they sucked on bones, passing them around, sharing marrow. It was a ritual, not just a meal, a union. In winter, fat became not only nourishment, but a symbol. You cared for others. You were not alone. Legends of meat, the hunting culture. Hunting wasn't just a way to gather food. It was a culture, an art, a ritual. Meat obtained through hunting wasn't just food. It was part of a story, part of the tribe. Every hunter became a hero, and every catch became a legend. The stars in the sky didn't just mark the seasons, they served as guides for hunting. Moonlight illuminated the path to the nearest watering hole, where herds could be found. Neanderthals knew that animals always followed the same routes. But this wasn't just knowledge, it was intuition, passed down from the elders to the young, from generation to generation. Hunting began long before they went out onto the battlefield. It was preparation, studying tracks, patience. Quietly in the shadows, they followed the prey, learning its habits. They knew that every movement, every sound could be heard. Every animal was respected. They didn't kill for pleasure, didn't take more than needed. The hunting ritual was sacred. After killing an animal, they gave thanks, paid tribute. The meat was shared among all, from the elderly to the children. It wasn't just food, it was a symbol of unity. Every piece of meat mattered. Every piece wasn't just a source of energy, but part of a ritual. From the skin, they made clothing. From the bones, tools. From teeth and claws, they made amulets, symbols of strength and luck. Hunting wasn't just a process. It was an art that transformed meat into culture. And every time the tribe sat by the fire and began to cook meat, it was a reminder that hunting was part of their essence. Meat was not only fuel for the body, but fuel for the soul. It connected people, passing on the knowledge and strength of their ancestors. And the secret of milk, the drinks of the ancestors. Water was life, but it wasn't the only thing ancient people drank. Occasionally, other liquids were discovered, rare, surprising, mysterious. One of these was milk, but the path to it was long and strange. Neanderthals observed animals. They saw how young ones drank from their mothers' bodies. They saw how milk gave strength. But to try it themselves, that was unusual, even strange. Milk seemed foreign, unnatural, until the time came. In hard times, when food was scarce, when everything and anything was searched for, someone took the risk. Perhaps it was a woman nursing a child, or a hunter seeing an animal lose its young. Milk was warm, sweet, alive. It became a revelation, but milk didn't keep. It spoiled quickly, turned sour, and that was the secret. Soured milk turned out to be useful. Sour, strange in taste, yet it didn't kill. It nourished. Sometimes it even eased stomach pain. So came the intuition. Not everything that changes is spoiled. Some transformations are blessings. Perhaps someone left milk in a clay pit and found a clot the next morning. Warm, thick, like a new substance. It turned out to be tasty and nourishing. Without knowing the word fermentation, they had discovered it. But not every tribe accepted milk. Some considered it baby food and avoided it. Others made thick pastes from it, dried it, packed it into fur pouches, and carried it on journeys. It was the first food that wasn't a dead kill. It came from a living body, without hunting, without blood. It was something new. And even though not every body could digest it, and though it sometimes caused pain, milk became a turning point. It was the beginning of a new kind of food. Food with a future. Because in it, there was a process, a change, a transformation, like life itself. Plants and flavors, the language of herbs and roots. Before meat, there was the root. Before fire, the grass. Before the spear, the berry. Plants were the very first food. They didn't need to be hunted. They waited in the shadows, grew in cracks of stone, clung to the earth, but they were full of mysteries. Some nourished, others killed. Neanderthals studied flavor, not through taste, but through the body. One ate, fell ill. Another didn't. A root brought drowsiness. A leaf, fever. A berry, stomach pain. Thus, the language of herbs was born. Without words, without books, only memory and observation. Those who remembered lived longer. They became the knowledgeable ones. Bitterness warned. Sweetness encouraged. Sourness called for caution. Heat signaled danger. Flavors weren't just sensations. They were a code, a language through which plants spoke to humans. And humans learned to listen. Some herbs eased pain. They were placed in the mouth, chewed, held under the tongue. Others caused dreams. People lay by the fire and drifted away. Some saw animals. Others, ancestors. There were also plants that caused fear. Even touching them brought burns. They were feared, but respected. Roots were food, some raw, others only after fire. People learned. Hold it above smoke, the poison fades. Bury it in hot ash. The bitterness goes. They began to cook even what was once thought inedible. Fire unlocked flavor. Over time, each place had its own herbs. At the foot of cliffs, some. By the water, others. And when moving to a new land, one had to learn all over again. Knowledge wasn't passed by accident. It was guarded, sometimes gifted like treasure. And even after millennia, this ancient language of taste lives on. Bitterness, sweetness, sourness. Humans sense them for a reason. This is ancestral memory. Knowledge that once saved lives. The scent of roasting. The birth of appetite. Fire changed everything. It gave light, warmth, protection. But most of all, it gave scent. New, unfamiliar, alluring. When meat first touched the flame, it didn't just cook. It began to speak. Smoke rose into the sky, and with it, aroma. It crept into the nose, into memory, into longing. The beast, once terrifying and dangerous, now became food. Hot, fragrant, inviting. The smell of roasting meat wasn't just food. It was a promise. It said, here is safety. Here is warmth. Here, we are alive. Neanderthals felt it without words. Smell became the first call to the fire. Meat on fire transformed. It crackled. It sizzled. It hissed. These were the sounds of new life, and each sound brought saliva. Appetite was born not in the stomach, but in the air. It became a feeling, a direction, even a dream. Soon, scent became a tool. People gathered around the aroma. It united. Even enemies might sit by the same fire if they felt the same hunger. The smell of food became a symbol of peace. But there were nuances. Burnt, repelled, undercooked, scared. People learned to listen to the meat, to wait, to turn, to move it closer to heat or farther from flame. They became cooks without knowing the word. And one day someone realized, food isn't only to be eaten, it can be anticipated, waited for, until the scent reached its peak. That was patience. That was art. Thus, appetite was born. Not mere hunger, but the desire for flavor. The scent of roasting is the memory trace of fire. And even today, after thousands of years, it brings the same. Saliva, hunger, joy, expectation. It is the language of flame, and it was understood even in the Stone Age. Stone plates, the first cave's kitchens. The cave wasn't just protection from the cold. It became a home, and every home needs a kitchen. Though there were no ovens, pots, or tables, there was order. There was meaning in where the meat lay, where the roots were kept, where the fire was. Thus, the kitchen was born. Neanderthals began to organize their space, not by habit, but by necessity. Near the entrance, broken bones. In the corner, a pile of nuts. By the walls, flat stones. On them, they placed pieces of food, dried them, sorted them. These were the first plates. The fire was the center. Around it, life. Some were butchering the carcass. Some were shredding roots. Some kept watch to ensure the meat didn't burn. It wasn't chaos, but a system. Everyone knew where the necessary items were. Everyone knew where the warmth was, where the smoke was, where the leftovers were. Sometimes they used shells. They poured water or fat inside. In the fat, they crumbled herbs, creating a brew. Even without proper dishes, they found ways. A horn, a skull, a bone. Everything served a purpose. Bone became a spoon, stone, a knife, fur, a tray. The kitchen of the cave smelled of roasting, of decay, of herbs, of smoked meat. It was the smell of life. Food didn't just fill the stomach, it created an atmosphere. And when the evening began in the cave, the fire crackled and the aroma filled the space. Everyone knew it was time to eat. Sometimes caves were passed down through generations, and with them, storage places, traditions, rituals of preparation. The same stone served as the table for decades. Its smooth surface became the memory of countless meals. Thus, the cave became a kitchen, not a place of randomness, but the center of life. There, food, scent, and order were born. There, what we now call home came to life. Sacrifice to the flame, the rituals of fire. Fire wasn't just a helper. It was sacred. It was magic. In its flames, there was a power that people couldn't fully understand, but they felt it with every fiber of their being. From the very beginning, they knew. Fire wasn't just a tamed beast. It was a gift. And this gift had to be respected. Fire couldn't simply be a tool to be used at will. It demanded recognition. It demanded reverence. And so, rituals were born around the fire. Every fire was like a sanctuary. The fire that burned in the center of the cave wasn't just a source of warmth. It was a place where the human world and the spiritual world met. Next to the fire, food was left for the ancestors, for the spirits, for the power of the flame. Sometimes animal bones were brought to be burned as a symbol of sacrifice. Other times, herbs were added to let the smoke fill the air and purify it. People worshipped fire the way we today worship light. Fire was a symbol of life and death. It destroyed, but it also created. It burned away everything that was lifeless, but it created something new from the ashes. That's why offerings were made. They weren't just food. They were sacrifices. They were acknowledgments of the fire's power. The smoke was important. It carried souls. While the flames consumed the meat, the smoke rose to the sky, like a message to the world of spirits. People looked at the smoke, and each one knew that it carried with it pieces of their desires, their hopes, their memories. Fire was the link between this world and what lay beyond the horizon, and the rituals around it were deeper than just customs. They were an expression of faith, hope, and respect for nature. Sacrifice to the fire wasn't just an act of gratitude, but also a way to strengthen the bond with those who had already passed, with those who had once been a part of their world. The first storm's stone lightning. A thunderstorm was a trial for a Neanderthal. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook the earth. The wind howled through the ravines. All of it seemed like the breath of a great beast, huge, invisible, living beyond the mountains. And yet, within that fear, a strength was born. They watched. They remembered. When lightning struck a tree, it caught fire. When dry grass ignited, fire was born. Neanderthals began to understand. Fire could come from the sky. It wasn't their doing. It was a gift. Stone lightning, as they might have called it, brought heat, but also danger. It gave life, but could also take it away. The first storms were not just a source of fear, but of learning. Neanderthals sought shelter, but they observed, where would it strike? How long would it burn? Was it safe to approach? Thus began science. Thus began caution. Sometimes they found charred branches. Sometimes smoldering stumps. And then, quietly, slowly, with bated breath, someone would approach, cautiously, silently, with a leather pouch in which they could hide a coal. They weren't stealing fire, they were receiving it. And yet, lightning terrified them. Its flash was sharp, too bright. Its sound like the earth's scream. When it struck nearby, the whole body trembled. But that was the moment when nature reminded them of itself. It could give and it could take. It could reward and punish. Neanderthals began to associate thunder and lightning with spirits. Thunder was a voice, lightning, a gesture. Perhaps it was a warning, perhaps a sign. Or maybe it was the game of the gods, where a human life was only a spark. Thus, the first storms became part of their world, not just as a phenomenon, but as a revelation. Stone lightning carried fear, but also understanding. The world was alive, and every rumble of it was a reminder that man was only a guest on this earth. The taste of ash, the first smokings. When food fell into the fire, it seemed like a loss. The meat crackled, the coals hissed, and smoke rose upward. But one day, someone tasted what had fallen, and the flavor was different. Deep, warm, piercing. Thus began the age of smoking. Fire didn't just roast, it enveloped, it infused. Smoke didn't merely wrap around the food, it transformed it. And the Neanderthals felt it. Where meat was lightly smoked, it lasted longer. The aroma, richer. The taste, sharper. This was a discovery. They began to experiment. They hung pieces of meat above the smoke, suspended herbs and roots. Sometimes they left food near the glowing embers all night long. The food became something else. Not only more durable, but also more flavorful. Neanderthals discovered that smoke didn't just drive away animals. It turned food into a gift. Primitive smokehouses appeared, niches in rocks, pits covered with hides, fires where food wasn't roasted but smoked. It wasn't just cooking, it was flavor alchemy. And every smoky day became a day of celebration. The cave smelled of wood, fat, and herbs. Every scent meant, there is food today, we can live today. Smoke became a symbol not only of survival, but of pleasure. Food was no longer just about quenching hunger. It was becoming an art. And when a Neanderthal first brought a piece of smoked meat to his lips, he tasted more than just flavor. He felt that he had tamed not just the beast, but the very element itself. Fire was no longer a threat. It had become an ally, a master of the ancient kitchen. Stone skillets, the first attempts at frying. Stone was the first tool, but also the first cookware. Flat, smooth slabs heated by the sun, and later by fire, became places where food began to whisper. Neanderthals noticed, if you placed meat or a root on a hot stone, it changed. It became softer, tastier. This wasn't boiling. This wasn't frying in oil. This was the beginning of frying. They began to select stones. Not all would do. Some cracked under heat, others didn't retain warmth. But those that were sturdy, heavy, and smooth, those became true skillets. And when such a stone was placed near the fire, magic began. Meat sizzled, fish writhed, roots released their juices. It was the aroma of the first culinary wonder. People approached fire, not for protection, but for flavor. They learned to control the heat. They turned food with sticks, and they listened to it sing. Some tribes began to carry special stones with them. They became part of daily life, like a spear or a pelt. The stone used to prepare food was respected. Sometimes it was placed in the center of the circle. It was the hot heart of the evening, the hearth around which life happened. Soon, food cooked on such stones became not only tastier, but safer. Heat killed rot, destroyed parasites. Neanderthals didn't know the words hygiene or bacteria, but they sensed this food was better. Thus the first frying was born. Without oil, without pans, but with reverence. Every crackle, every sizzle was a step toward making food not just a means of survival, but a moment of joy. Salt of the earth, the first seasoning. The taste of food was not always vivid. Raw meat, bitter roots, tough grass, these were foods, but not pleasures. Until one day, someone tried licking a stone left after drying meat by a salty spring, and the tongue felt something new, salt. It wasn't like any other taste. It burned, awakened, enhanced. Salt made meat sweeter, herbs sharper, roots richer. It didn't just change the flavor, it created it. Neanderthals realized, with it, food comes alive. A hunt for salt began. Stones covered with white deposits were licked, ground, thrown into the fire. The powder was added to food, rubbed into meat, sprinkled on fish. Some tribes began to trade hides for crystals, brought from afar. Salt became valuable. But not only salt was discovered. Neanderthals began to notice leaves, berries, bark. Wild garlic leaves added sharpness, oak bark, bitterness, juniper berries, tartness. Food stopped being just filling. It became expressive. Cooking became a process of selection. Every hunter knew venison went better with bitterness, boar with sharpness. The elders kept knowledge. What could be eaten and what should be added. And food became more complex. The first seasoning was a turning point, not just for survival, but for flavor, for sensation, for choice. And in that moment, humanity first felt mastery over nature, not with a spear, but with taste buds. Stone slabs, the first bakers. The first bakers didn't use ovens. Their slabs were simple stones. But on these stones, on these hot surfaces, they began to unlock the secrets of bread. On riverbanks, in the shadow of mountains, by the fires, they would place crushed grains, roots, herbs, and wet leaves. All of it would turn into something new, something soft, with a golden crust, nourishing. This was the beginning of the first bread. From time to time, when they discovered one of those stones covered with the crust of food, Neanderthals realized if you leave a mixture of grain and water on a hot stone, it would rise. The dough didn't just bake, it began to swell. This wasn't just a discovery. This was the first bread. Stone slabs became ovens. The place where the fire rested became the kitchen. At first, bread was made from coarse grains, ground by hand. It was tough, rough, but nourishing. And despite its simplicity, it became the foundation of food. A strange feeling filled their souls. Now people could eat not just meat and fish, but something entirely new. Neanderthals began to experiment with dough. They added more water to make it softer. They mixed it with meat to create something like a pie. Dough became not only a way to satisfy hunger, but also a tool for creating new flavors. It could be simple and rough, but it became vital. And although Neanderthals didn't know what bakers were, they became the first bakers. And even though they didn't have ovens, they had already learned how to make bread. It wasn't just a food product. It was a symbol of human progress, a symbol of creativity and changing the world. Roasted stone, the frying experiment. Frying on stones wasn't just a way to cook. It was an art. Stones didn't only retain heat, they reflected it. They didn't just heat the food, they imparted their character to it, creating flavors that couldn't have appeared in water or fire alone. The first experiments with frying began when Neanderthals noticed that meat, pressed against hot stones, became not only softer, but also developed a special crust. This crust was like culinary magic. It sealed in the juices of the meat, while the outer layer became crisp and golden. They began experimenting with meat, fish, and roots. Stones were used as grills. But this process wasn't fast. Patience was required to heat the stone to the right temperature so it could fry the food without burning it. It was a complex skill, but it yielded results. Neanderthals started using not only flat stones, but also round ones to fry meat over the fire. They heated the stones, then placed the meat on them to slowly cook. This process took time and required attention, but the results were worth the effort. Stones became versatile tools, not only helping to cook, but also changing the very flavors of the food. With every experiment, Neanderthals became more skilled in preparing food. They began to understand how stones and fire could work together to create something far more complex and delicious than just roasted meat. The roasted stone became a symbol of culinary progress. It was not only a means of survival, but also a way to connect with nature, with fire, and with the earliest experiences of preparing food. Spicy herbs, a growing world of flavors. When Neanderthals learned to use stones for frying and baking, They began to notice that the plants and herbs growing around them could be not only useful but also flavorful. This was a new step in the evolution of their cuisine, using herbs to add aromas and new tastes. The first spices were simple: leaves of wild plants, roots, flowers. They began to taste and experiment with them. Some plants added sharpness, others bitterness, and some brought sweetness. Nature became their laboratory. At first, they used herbs instinctively, not knowing exactly which ones were edible and which might be poisonous. But with experience, they became more confident. Sage leaves, mint, thyme. These herbs didn't just decorate dishes, they opened up new horizons of flavor. Neanderthals began adding them to meat, fish, as well as to roots and grains. But flavor wasn't the only thing that attracted them. Some herbs were used to make food more nutritious. Parsnip root not only added sweetness, but also energy. Nettles, which were almost inedible raw, became a great source of vitamins and minerals after being processed. The use of spicy herbs became an important part of not only food preparation, but also culture. They began to play a role in rituals, in healing potions, in the search for balance with nature. For in every plant, in every flavor, Neanderthals felt a deep connection to the world around them. At this moment, cooking was turning into an art. It was no longer just the process of satisfying hunger. It was about mastering and understanding the world through taste. And spicy herbs became a symbol not only of culinary progress, but also of humanity's connection to nature. The first feast, food as ritual. One day, food became something more than just fuel for the body. It became a reason to gather. For the first time, food brought the tribe together not only around the fire, but in a shared celebration. It wasn't just a meal, it was an event. The cause for the first feast could have been a successful hunt, the birth of a child, or the arrival of spring. But more important than the reason was the realization. Food could be a binding force, a way to express joy, gratitude, and hope. For such an occasion, the food was prepared differently. The best cuts of meat were chosen, the sweetest roots, the most aromatic herbs. Everything was arranged with care and attention. Perhaps it was decorated with leaves, laid out in a circle, forming symbols only they understood. The fire burned brighter than usual, as if it felt the solemnity of the moment. During such a feast, no one ate alone. People shared food, passed pieces to each other, watched the children rejoice, listened as elders told stories. This ritual strengthened the bonds within the tribe, offering a sense of safety and meaning. Perhaps it was in such moments that the tradition of gathering at a table was born, of sharing not only food, but also stories, emotions, and plans. A festive meal became not just a collection of calories, but a way to remember who you are, where your roots lie, and why it matters to be together. From that first feast began the history of gastronomic rituals. And though no one called it a banquet, the essence was the same. It was a day when food spoke for everyone. Flavor from the outside, how weather changed food. Food didn't exist in a vacuum. It always depended on the world around it, on the wind, rain, sun, and cold. Neanderthals quickly realized that the taste of food could change depending on the season, and even on how long it had been left in the open air. Weather became an invisible ingredient in every meal. In spring, food was soft and juicy. Young leaves and shoots had a delicate flavor. Roots were full of moisture. Game meat hunted during this time was light, lean, and infused with the aromas of the first greenery. Spring meals evoked freshness and renewal. Summer brought richness. Berries filled dishes with sweetness, herbs with intensity. Under the scorching sun, food dried quickly, and Neanderthals began using this as a preservation method. Meat left in the sun became tougher, but retained its flavor. Summer taught them how to dry food. Autumn brought deeper, heavier flavors. Roots became denser, nuts richer in fat. game meat was now thick and fatty, ready to warm during the coming winter. This was the time of storing up, and the food reflected that. It became hearty and calorie-rich. Winter was the harshest season. Most plants disappeared under the snow. What remained were dried goods, fats, and whatever was left in storage. But in this time, food took on special meaning. Every bite was precious. Every scent a reminder of life. And the cold added its own flavor, making fats firmer, enhancing aromas, preserving scents. Weather didn't just influence the availability of ingredients. It changed taste, texture, even the perception of food. Neanderthals ate not only what they found, they ate what the season whispered to them. Their cuisine was part of nature, just as they were. When water became delicious, soups, broths, and the first stews. At some point, Neanderthals noticed something curious. If you dropped a piece of meat, herbs, or roots into hot water, the water changed. It gained flavor. Thus was born one of humanity's greatest culinary ideas, soup. Of course, they didn't have pots in the usual sense, but they had pits lined with stones to retain heat. They had containers made from tightly woven roots or animal hide. And most importantly, they had fire and patience. They would heat stones in the fire, then drop them into vessels of water. This way, water could be brought to a boil without a metal pot. When meat was added, the fat would melt, aroma would spread, and the liquid would become infused with flavor. Roots, leaves, even bones could be tossed in. Anything that could lend something to the water. Water stopped being just moisture. It became food. A hot broth warmed during winter nourished the body and helped digest heavier meals. It suited the elderly who struggled to chew, and children who couldn't yet handle coarse food. This was food infused with care. Broth became a bridge between people and nature. It allowed them to use what was once discarded. Cartilage, tendons, bones. Everything gained flavor. Everything had value. Perhaps it was with the first soup that true culinary art was born. Because to make water delicious, you need more than food. You need an idea. And the Neanderthals already had one. To warm, to nourish, to preserve. When herbs became spices, flavor from the earth. With each generation, Neanderthals became more skilled at foraging for food. But it wasn't just meat and roots that formed the basis of their diet. Over time, they began to notice that even the ordinary herbs growing around them could add flavor and aroma to their meals. Not all plants could be eaten raw. Some were bitter or even poisonous. But with experience came knowledge. If gathered, dried, or prepared properly, these plants could turn into powerful seasonings. Simple herbs like parsley, thyme, or mint could transform the taste of meat, giving it a freshness. But the more complex the plant, the more surprising its flavor. Herbs that once were ignored now became an integral part of their cooking. Neanderthals began using herbs not only for taste, but also for health. For example, roots like ginger or garlic helped with digestion. Leaves and flowers could be used to ward off illnesses or to support the body during cold winters. Over time, their cuisine became increasingly diverse, and the use of herbs and plants turned into a true art form. Each dish took on its own unique composition of flavors. These plants not only complemented food, but added depth and complexity, opening new horizons in nourishment. Herbs became more than just an additional ingredient. They symbolized how nature and humans could work together, creating something more than just food. The wisdom of bones, how bones became a source of food. In Neanderthal cuisine, bones held a special place. Initially, they were seen as an unwanted byproduct after butchering prey. But over time, they became an essential part of the diet. Neanderthals discovered that bones could be used for more than just tools or adornments. Bones could be cooked, yielding not only collagen, but also fats that transformed into nutritious broths. These stews were not only delicious, but extremely beneficial. When meat was tough and food supplies were dwindling, bones became a source of additional sustenance. With the help of bones, they could prepare meals that provided warmth and the energy necessary to survive the harsh winter months. But bones served not only as a food source. Broths made from them were also used for healing wounds and other ailments. Some of these broths contained compounds that aided tissue repair and maintained health. Bones became a symbol of wisdom. They reminded Neanderthals of the importance of everything that nature provided, even if it initially seemed useless. Over time, Neanderthals learned not only to extract food from bones, but also to use them in preparing various dishes. Meat cooked on bones became softer and more flavorful, and broths turned rich and hearty. Bones became an integral part of their diet. When smoke became flavor, smoking and aroma. With the development of fire, Neanderthals began to realize that smoke was not just a way to stay warm, but also a way to alter the taste of food. Fire could make meat tender, and smoke imparted a completely new, deep aroma. Neanderthals began using smoke to preserve food. Smoked meat became not only a method to extend its shelf life, but also an amazing way to add flavors of the forest, herbs, and tar. The smoking process turned meat into something more. It became not just food, but a part of the world in which these people lived. Initially, smoking happened by accident. Meat left on the fire began to soak in the smoke. However, over time, Neanderthals learned to control this process, using smoke to give the meat a special taste and aroma. Smoked meat had a unique texture. It became tougher, yet retained its flavor and fragrance. This method also allowed food to be stored for long periods. When food supplies ran low, smoked meat became a real lifesaver, and its taste became a symbol of survival. Smoke became not only a cooking technique, but also a part of Neanderthal culture. It wasn't just a way to preserve food, but a way to connect with nature. Just like with the meat, the smoke permeated everything. It became a part of their daily life and consciousness, a link between humans and fire. When fire became a friend, how fire became an integral part of life. For Neanderthals, fire was not just a tool, but a true friend and protector. It became their ally in the battle against the cold, wild animals and the darkness of the night. But over time, fire became much more than a necessity. It became a part of their daily life and the foundation of their survival. Neanderthals used fire not only to cook food, but also to light their shelters, to warm themselves on cold nights, and to protect themselves from predators. Fire became their light in a dark world, their warmth in a harsh climate. It was not just a physical source of heat, but also an emotional element that brought people together, creating comfort and security around the fire. Over time, Neanderthals learned not only to maintain fire, but also to transport it. They began carrying glowing embers from one place to another to ensure they wouldn't lose the fire and could have it at hand at all times. This was not only practical, but also symbolic. Fire became portable, mobile, just like their way of life. But fire became more than just a friend and helper. It became a part of their culture. Fire was a source of not only heat and light, but also strength. It symbolized life and struggle, a source of energy and power. Through fire, Neanderthals felt a connection to the world around them, with nature, animals, and the sky. Fire became an essential part of their daily lives, their safety, and their very existence. With each passing day, they became more dependent on it. And though fire brought many benefits, it also required respect and care. Fire could be both a friend and an enemy, if not handled with the proper caution. Taming water. How water became an essential part of nutrition. Water was always present for Neanderthals, but only over time did they realize how important it could be as a source of food and life. Water was not just a liquid that quenched thirst. For Neanderthals, water became a key element of their diet and survival. They learned to use water not only for drinking, but also for cooking. Rivers, lakes, and streams became sources not only for quenching thirst, but also for boiling food, making broths and soups, which were an important part of their diet. Water mixed with meat, roots, and herbs created tasty and nutritious dishes that helped not only to satisfy hunger, but also to replenish essential micronutrients. Over time, Neanderthals realized that water helped not only in food preparation, but also in food preservation. They used water to store meat, preparing it for the winter months. Some types of meat, such as fish, were soaked in water to keep them fresh and available for consumption throughout the year. Water was also used for other purposes. It became an important element in hunting, such as for catching fish or soaking and processing plants they used in their daily lives. Water became an integral part of their existence, a link between Neanderthals and nature, an essential resource for sustaining life and health. Thus, water, which initially seemed like a given, became not only a means of survival, but also an important part of their culinary traditions, strengthening their connection with nature and the world around them. Plants in the diet. How wild plants became a nutritional foundation. Meat was always an important source of energy for Neanderthals, but without wild plants, their diet would have been incomplete. Roots, leaves, berries, nuts, and seeds all became an essential part of their daily food, gathered with attention and knowledge of the surrounding environment. At first, plants were consumed raw. Berries were eaten straight from the bush, leaves were chewed during long journeys, and roots were dug out of the ground and cleaned. Gradually, Neanderthals began to understand which plants were edible and which were dangerous. This knowledge was passed down from generation to generation, becoming ingrained in habits and even perhaps in the early traces of culture. Some plants required special preparation. Bitter roots needed to be soaked or roasted over coals to make them edible. Seeds were ground into powder and added to dishes to enrich them and make them more nutritious. In this way, plants evolved from simple snacks into a full part of the diet. Neanderthals also began using plants as flavor enhancers. Certain leaves and roots added aroma and taste to food. This indicates a development of taste perception and a desire to make meals not only nourishing, but also enjoyable. Gathering plants became an important part of life, especially for women and elder members of the tribe. It was a meticulous task, requiring memory, observation, and caution. Some plants were used not only for food, but also for medicinal purposes, to relieve pain, treat wounds, and improve digestion. Thus, wild vegetation, from modest grasses to rare berries, earned its rightful place in the Neanderthal diet. They learned to see nature not only as a threat, but also as a bounty to be used for life and prosperity. The first recipes, how cooking traditions were born. When Neanderthals began experimenting with food preparation, they had no idea they were laying the foundations for the first recipes. Their tribes had no writing, no books, but they had memory, strong, oral, and passed from one generation to the next. Each new cooking method emerged through observation, error, and repetition. They noticed that meat cooked over fire became softer and more flavorful, that a root left in ashes lost its bitterness, that fish wrapped in leaves and baked in hot sand stayed juicy. These discoveries weren't accidents. They were the result of constant interaction with nature and the drive to survive. Gradually, stable combinations formed. Meat with certain herbs, roots with charcoal, berries with fat. These recipes weren't written down, but were remembered. Children were told how to properly cook specific foods, under which conditions, and with which additions. This was the birth of an oral culinary tradition, simple yet resilient. There were even primitive specialists. Someone was best at roasting fish. Another knew which roots could be combined safely. The tribe valued those who could not only gather food, but also make it tasty and satisfying. It became part of their social role. The emergence of the first recipes marked the beginning of food culture. Not just eating to survive, but preparing food to bring joy. And even though the recipes were simple, with no exact measurements or names, they already carried the voice of human taste and the desire for something better. Division of responsibilities. Who cooked in the Stone Age? In a Neanderthal tribe, everyone knew their role. It wasn't a strict law, but a matter of survival. Dividing responsibilities helped them endure the harsh world. And food preparation became one of those duties that, over time, settled into the hands of specific members of the group. The main part of hunting was typically taken on by the men. They traveled far from the camp, tracked large animals, and risked their lives. But once the prey was brought back, a second, equally important phase began. Its butchering, preservation, and cooking. That's when others stepped in, most often women, adolescents, and elders. Women handled the meat, gathered plants, roots, and berries. They prepared food using fire, ash, hot stones, wrapping it in leaves to keep it moist and warm. This was more than physical labor. It required knowledge, memory, and intuition. What goes together? What is dangerous? How long to keep it over the coals? They knew it all. Elders, no longer strong enough to hunt, passed on their wisdom. They watched over the children by the fire, teaching them their first skills in handling food. Their memories held everything: where to find edible roots, how to prepare a certain fish, in what season to collect nuts. It was a collective culinary consciousness, distributed by age and experience. Even children joined in, fetching water, gathering dry twigs, bringing leaves, helping to hold food over the flames. This gradually built a sense of responsibility and the understanding that food was the result of shared effort. Thus, cooking in the Stone Age reflected the tribe's social structure. Everyone contributed according to their strength and knowledge, and food, as the outcome of joint labor, united them all. Around the fire, in the cold, during feasts, and in lean times, culinary discoveries, mistakes, breakthroughs, and luck by the fire. Neanderthals, like all humans, learned from their mistakes, and often, mistakes became the foundation of the greatest discoveries. In cooking, this was especially evident. In the harsh conditions of primitive life, when each day was a struggle for survival, even the smallest improvement in food preparation could change everything. At first, Neanderthals didn't know how to cook food over the fire. They might have thrown meat directly into the coals, unaware that it could burn on the outside while remaining raw inside. But over time, they realized that the right temperature of the fire was crucial for even cooking. They learned to use different methods of thermal processing, such as roasting, boiling in water, or steaming. Mistakes in food preparation were also related to the fact that many products required pre-treatment. For example, the roots of certain plants were bitter and hard to digest. However, if left in water or ash for several days, their taste became much milder and more edible. This is how the first recipes were born, which were passed down through generations over time. Not only mistakes, but also lucky accidents led to important discoveries. One striking example is the moment when Neanderthals discovered that food roasted over a fire tasted much better than raw food. Perhaps someone accidentally left a piece of meat or fish on the fire, forgetting about it, and discovered that the result was far more appetizing. This opened a whole new era in food preparation. Culinary discoveries were not just accidents. They gradually became conscious knowledge, passed down from generation to generation. This was the development of food culture, based on experience and observation, which improved the quality of life and made food an essential part of daily life. Food as the foundation of civilization, from the fire to the future. Food, like fire, was the element that allowed survival and development. Neanderthals, teaching each other not only hunting but also the art of cooking, laid the foundation for the cultural and social structures that would exist thousands of years later. Their culinary traditions, passed down through generations, became the foundation for more complex culinary systems that would emerge with the development of agriculture and other technologies. Primitive cuisine was not just a matter of survival, it became a symbol of connection with nature and society. In this process, where mistakes led to discoveries and luck brought new understanding of the world, the first culture was born. A culture that taught not only to value the result, but the process itself. The labor that unites people, the knowledge that is passed down, and the joy brought by shared meals. And although Stone Age cooking was rudimentary, it already contained the foundations for the further development of culinary traditions, which would later give rise to modern culinary schools, gastronomy, and the science of nutrition. The Neanderthals, perhaps unaware, were pioneers in this field, but their discoveries would continue to live and evolve through many generations. The first dishes cooked over fire, with herbs and berries, with meat and roots, were not just food. They were a story of survival, but also a story of humanity, which will continue to exist in every bite of food we cook, eat, and pass on to future generations.